Welcome to Lift Your Story podcast with guest Karen Chaston, author, speaker, life coach specializing in loss. Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Toronto, Canada, and I'm with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we welcome Karen Chaston, and she's an author, speaker, life coach specializing in loss. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's really exciting.
We're glad to have you. So you went from a CFO, right? And now you're an author, speaker, and you're a beyond loss expert.
That's
Can
right.
you kind of define that for us?
The journey. Don't you think that they're just a natural progression? Okay, so back in 2011, I was a CFO of a publicly listed company here in Australia. And, most people would go, oh, wow, look at Karen. She has it all. She's got the job, she's got the house, she's got the family, overseas trips, the great salary, the whole lot of things, what most of us think define us as successful. But boy, not only was I wrong, so was everyone else. On the 10th of July, my husband and I woke thinking we were going to have a lazy Sunday at home. But within minutes, we were racing out our back door, looking at our beautiful 27-year-old son, Dan, lying there in the fetal position with saliva coming out of his mouth. And we thought he was unconscious, didn't know why. But within moments, the paramedics arrived and they said those words that no mother, no parent ever wants to hear. Sorry, madam, he is dead and he probably has been for several hours. And of course, it's the last thing anyone expects. And the day after his funeral, I just went straight back to work, eating more, working more, and drinking even more. But that's what you do, isn't it? That's what you're told to do. Just keep busy, just carry on, give it time, everything will be all right. And, of course, I just got angrier and angrier, and I just sort of departed myself even more from me. And I didn't even realize how much I was not looking after myself. Even before Dan passed away, I was just, working, and fitting everything else in whenever. But then 15 months later, the company that I was working for was merging with another. And they said to me in the merger process, Karen, you're not going to be CFO in the new company, but we want you to come with us. We want you to be doing everything you're doing now, plus more. And I just went, yeah, okay. What's the title? What does it really matter? Sort of thing, until they gave me my contract. And that was the greatest gift they ever gave to me, because the salary was 2/3 of what my current salary was. And it really made me angry for about 48 hours. And then after that, I really like to say that I started to wake from my Groundhog Day days. And I started to realize, you know what? I'm only here for the money. And if I'm honest, I'm wasting most of it just to get through the day. I'm not looking after me. I'm unhealthy. And that's when I took redundancy, which was the best thing I ever did. And that's when I knew that I wasn't going to be a CFO anymore. I was going to do something different. And that's what I did. I trained as a life coach, and then I thought I was going to be helping women to stay and be women in the corporate environment, but that just didn't go the way I thought it would. And then before I knew it, I deep dived into loss, because I did it the hard way. I did it the really, really hard way. And most people are doing it the hard way. So that's what I did. As I deep dived into loss, I started to realize that there is a better way to do it. And that's what I did.
Wow. Sorry, I'm tearing up a little bit here because my sister had a son who passed away at 23. So this is a very dear to my heart subject. And this is very inspiring to listen to. So thank you.
But the thing is that Dan's with me. Like, I actually spend more time with Dan than I do with his two brothers and his sister. He's just guided me the whole way. He's guided me to write my books. everything that I wasn't doing before, where I was playing small, he's really got me to, come on, Mum, you can do it. And he's just constantly around me and constantly showing me signs that he's here.
I believe that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
So what you do be considered grief counseling, or is it something different?
It is grief counselling, but I don't think it's different. It's different. I think it's more life coaching, but we do deep dive into losses, and there's over 40 different kinds of losses, right? So there's not just a loss of a loved one. There's a divorce, your job loss, your health, your wealth, your pets. And if we go into all of the minor losses or considered minor losses that have come up, in the last 18 months during the pandemic, things like loss of freedom, choice, status, identity, changing work conditions, recreational activities, social activities. There's all of these things that come up for us, which we wouldn't really consider a grief situation, but it does cause us grief. And that's why we find it hard sometimes to move beyond it and to think, well, what does this mean for us? How can we, we're not going to go back. There's no way we're going to back to whatever we were doing before whatever the loss event was. How do we go forward and really bounce forward and create that better everyday life? That's what I do. But I do help them to deep dive into the losses and actually find the gift. And I know that sounds really strange after losing my son, that there's a gift in loss, but there is a huge gift in loss. If I look at my redundancy, just the way that I got back to me, the way I've improved every single one of my relationships, which I would never have done if I was still in my corporate, working these ridiculous hours and not spending time with them. And even if I was physically there, I was always mentally back in the workplace, oh, I could do this, I could do that, all that sort of stuff. So that's what it's more about than anything else. But it is it does start with that focus, that major loss, whether it be a death of a loved one or a divorce or a job loss. That seems to be the main three that people come to me for.
Well, without getting political, you had mentioned like the pandemic, with the things that are going on in Australia now, are you seeing a lot more people?
No, I'm not.
Really?
You would think I would be. It's hard not to get political on what's going on in Australia. We all have our viewpoints on it, and I'm probably more out there than most. Look, there's always a good in everything that's happening, and I do find like these lockdowns are ridiculous. I live in Queensland, so I'm not as affected as what it was, but my daughter, who I adopted out when I was 16, right? And she is in my life. She has been in my life for the past 20 years. And the funny thing is that I went down to Sydney for 5 days to see her at the 23rd of June. I was advised not to travel, that I may go into lockdown, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to see her. It's really important what we're about to do. And I thought, it'll be fine. I ended up staying 6 weeks, right? I didn't have to stay 6 weeks. I could have come back to Queensland earlier, but I chose to stay 6 weeks with her because we are now in a good space. As you can imagine, the last 20 years has been very up and down, and that's a huge loss event. So much more than what I certainly realized would ever have happened when I was 16. So creating that relationship with her was really important because even though they were in lockdown, we were in the same area. So we could walk each day. We weren't staying together, but we could walk each day together, and we could really create a great relationship. So that was a good sign. That was a good thing that happened in the lockdown. I met so many of her family, which I had never met over the years, a lot of her friends, the whole lot of it, even though we were in lockdown. So that's, there's always a good in everything that's happening. But I feel that a lot of people, that they just don't know that they're even in this grief causing situation. They're angry. A lot of them are losing their incomes and losing their jobs. And, we've got a ridiculous policy here that they're trying to introduce no jab, no job, you know, which is pathetic. It really
That's happening here in Canada now too. And they're
Yeah,
basically saying unless you have your 2 shots that you will not be, there's no freedom of choice on that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying whether I'm for or against it. I have my 2 sides of it. I tend to be a middle person in politics and everything else. And people will say, well, don't you have a voice? That's where I am sad about, is that when I look at the 2 sides, both sides should have a voice, but it's being, as far as I'm concerned, I have one friend who actually is being charged for having a voice and being jailed for it because there's no freedom of speech, and he's literally going to jail for it. And we're not talking about, you know, those political, you know, fighters out there. It's just it's somebody who says something and just feels that I should have the right to say what I want to say without, and on social media and wherever I want to say it. Do I agree with all of he said? No, but I think that that's being taken away from us. And that was a big thing last night, was announced that he's going to jail, and he had a live before he's going saying our freedom of speech is going. What we're fighting for, his and his little group, is to give our children the right to get back their speech.
Yeah, totally.
So,
The thing that really worries me more than anything else is the fact that they've never gone down the, you know, we all have an immune system. We can build our immune system in this. That's my biggest issue over anything else, is it's never been, let's get healthy, let's do this, you know, take this vitamin, you know, add zinc to it, all this sort of stuff. There's so many things out there that says if you actually do this, there's been none of that talk. If there had been that talk and then there was this as well, you'd go, okay, fair enough. But at the end of the day, it's still only a trial vaccination. It's not even, it hasn't even been approved. That's the issue that I think most people are having, the ones who have, you know, not got over it. I've done a lot of work on myself. I've done a lot of stuff about learning to love yourself, deep diving into things, not going into fear. And I feel, from what I have seen, the people who are, no, let's wait and see. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, like all my kids were vaccinated. I had a vaccination a couple of years ago when my first grandson was born, so that because the mother said, you're not going to hold him for 6 months if you don't have this. So I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but what I am is I'm an anti-trial. Let's just wait and see. That's my issue more than anything else. And I guess I'm lucky in the fact that I live in a warmer climate. You know, I really feel for people in Melbourne where it's colder, you know, than now the longest lockdown city in the whole world, which is ridiculous. It's just, yeah. But we have a couple of court cases going on at the moment about our rights. And I know that the world is watching just to see what comes from that. But this isn't what we're meant to be talking about, is it?
No.
I love your attitude on, and it's funny because I was coming back from my doctor's, and there was the thing about, you know, looking for the good in things. Don't look for the good, look in the good, for the good. Things may be bad, but look for the good in things. And you just, this is what you're sending out, which I find quite coincidental that I listened to that quote on the radio on my way here, and here we're talking about it. I wanted to ask you something, if you don't mind. So there was one thing, and both of my sisters lost a child, both of them at 23. One was from an accidental overdose, the other one from cancer. One pretty recent, 2 years ago, the other 10 years. And it's a long term. And I know that a lot of people, and I know that you do different kinds of griefs. I mean, I went through a grief through divorce. It was very difficult. But in the child side of it, because that's important for me, I was very close to my nephew, not so much to my niece, but I did know her. One of the things I know that my sister, the sister who lost her son to cancer, she had a really hard time with faith at the beginning. And my youngest sister, she's going through that now. Now my oldest sister is starting to believe, and she can feel all that you're saying, that her son's there, that everything that's happening is for a reason. We always say Ross is with us right now because he puts us in the right direction. We believe that. Yeah. My youngest sister is struggling with that feeling. I don't know if there's anything that would be, I mean, would you have anything to say to that?
Oh yeah. It's the first book I would get her to read. It's not one of mine, believe it or not. I would definitely get her to read one of mine, but I've got Demystifying Loss coming out in a couple of months. I'm just doing the final edits on it now. But there is one book, I don't know if she's ever read it. It's called Radical Forgiveness by Colin Tipping. Now, that book is, the whole concept of it is we're spiritual beings. We come down here and we have a journey, and you know, everything that happens to us happens for us. So nothing happens to us, it happens for us. And it's about trying to deep dive into how this is for you. And look, losing a child is the last thing anyone expects. It's so out of order. We do tend to think that people are going to die in the order of their birth, but it just doesn't work that way. So it is about her deep diving into that. And I have so many spiritual books that I could get her to read, which will assist her. But what I've found, that I had a spiritual belief. I was brought up Catholic and I stopped practicing when I was 18, but I was always had a spiritual concept. You know, I always knew there was more to it than this, and I always believed in the hereafter and stuff like that. Another great book is Life on the Other Side by Sylvia Brown. Now, that was written in 2001, and I read it in 2001. Dan passed 10 years later. And I bought that book because it was so sudden. Like, we literally thought a healthy 27-year-old had gone out the night before. Next morning, he's dead at our back door. And it's like, oh my God, what has happened? And, you know, it took us a long while to find out that it was actually, yes, he had drunk too much. Yes, he had fallen over and everything shook up. But what happened was his lungs had failed him. And 2 years earlier, he'd been in Scotland and he had pneumonia, spent a week in hospital. So, you know, at the autopsy, they said, you know, if he had smoked full on for 10 years, which he hadn't, he couldn't have done a quarter of the damage that the lungs were. So that's how he passed. But the funny thing is that because it was such a shock to everyone, it was like, oh my God, a lot of people weren't coping, especially one of my girlfriends who used to babysit my kids when, you know, they were younger. She was like, I just can't get over it. I can't get over it. She said, not that you're allowed to have favorites, but Dan was the favorite of, you know, your 3 sons and all this sort of stuff. So I went and bought this book, Life on the Other Side, and it really helped her. Like, she was in bed. She couldn't get out of bed for a week. Whereas she's like, oh, why aren't you in bed? No, there's just, obviously everyone grieves differently, not that there's a right or a wrong way. And I gave this book to so many people and it helped them to assist. That book alone will help you because it actually guides you from what we do before we come down here, what we do when we're here, and what happens when we go back. And it was really an in for me to go, right, this is happening with Dan at the moment. This is Dan, this is Dan. And I waited 6 months before I went to a clairvoyant, and he came through unbelievably. The things he said were so spot on that the actual Georgina Walker was the name of the lady, and she actually was writing her 3rd book. She said, I want to write another chapter just on this reading. She said, I've never had things come through as clearly at what it is. You don't have to wait 6 months, right? I've learned that now. They can come to you, you know, at any time. I thought you had to wait 6 months. So there's just so many things that can help her. I'd love to talk to her. It's just a perspective change. It's just another way of looking at things, a better way of looking at things. That's what I feel. I don't know if that helps or hinders.
It really does. And just quickly, before we finish this, I think that there's also a difference too, because my one sister, she went through cancer, is not something that she could prevent or anything. And so there's not that same sense of guilt as where my youngest sister, because it was accidental overdose, there's that sense of guilt. Could I have done something? Could I have? And so I think that that's also, she's trying to process that, and it may be cutting her off from being able to feel. I don't know. That was my thoughts.
Yeah. That's where I deep dive into why does she feel guilty? And it's through the questions that we ask, we obviously find the answers and then the action steps to move forward. But it is about her getting through her guilt. And guilt's an emotion, obviously. So it is about deep diving in and understand your emotions, actually coming to realize that your emotions are actually your friend. We don't think that because they're painful, but they're only painful for a little while. And the more that you work through them, and the process that I do is they complete the relationship. So they work through all of the things that they would like to apologize for, the things that they'd like to forgive, and the things that they'd like to acknowledge. So in that process, all of these emotions come up. So that's why they can then move forward. You know, I've met people 20 years ago, their child passed away, they still couldn't even say their name. And it's like, oh my God, it's like they never existed, which isn't healthy for either of them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just one last thing. Do you write about the grief of alienation, parents and alienated children who alienate them, or the other way around?
No, I haven't.
Or is that something that I would highly recommend you write about, because it's becoming more and more, even the child alienating their parent is becoming more and more common. It's crazy. So if your next book, I'm looking forward to.
Okay. Is that
I
the
highly
adult
recommend
child? Is that an adult child alienating their adult parents?
It can be, usually it is within the between teens, like, so they can start at 13 and sometimes it can be right up to 30. I'm going through that and I understand that. I let them go through whatever their process is. But at the beginning, it was very difficult for me to process that, because I was really, really close to my oldest son. And then suddenly at 30 decided that he didn't want anything to do with me, and he won't talk about why. So I can't change, I can't stop my life and worry about it too much. So I have to keep moving. But it is a really, it took me a while to get over that grief. It's a grieving process.
But have you completed that grieving process? Have you got to the stage of completing it? Because what you would find is when you complete it, you will find that he could possibly come back, because he will energetically feel it. Right. So what I did with my daughter, right, the one who, her name's Kim, who I adopted out when I was 16, we had this up and down relationship. So I did the process on the baby that I adopted out, right? Not the adult. I met her when she was 27. So I had to do the process. Well, I didn't have to. I felt that the best way to do it was to do my process on the relationship between the baby and me. Right, and my reasons for choosing adoption. Then, as soon as that happened, she never knew I was doing it. I actually did it last year when we were in lockdown, and we didn't even see each other for like 15 months. And then her energy changed completely. She was more open to that relationship, because we're all energetic beings, so we all feel each other. So even though, and you know, in the process, if you end up writing a letter, but you never ever would read it to the person if they're in this realm. You read it to someone else, but you don't ever read it to that person, you know, especially because there's no need to. They will energetically feel that you have moved on. So that's something you may like to look at.
Thank you. Sorry, I know, like, poor Roy's sitting there. I'm taking over right now.
No.
Sorry, Roy. Go for a question.
Well, no, I was just going to ask Karen, you know, can you tell us about your books?
Okay, well, believe it or not, I think this is a funny story. So the first book that I thought I was going to write ended up being my third book. So as I said, I was pregnant at 16, and, you know, good Catholic girl. I also had two other girlfriends who were pregnant in those teenage years, and one chose to get married, another one chose abortion, and I chose adoption. So I was going to write my book, which ended up being my third book, and it's called Teenagers Playing Grown-Ups. But I brought a fourth girl into it, with the one who chose to be a single mother. So that was my story. But before I was going to write it, I met up with one of my friends who I hadn't seen for a while, the one who chose abortion. And I told her that I was going to write this book. And she goes, "What do you mean you're going to write a book?" She said, "You were really good at maths. You were hopeless at English. Why would you even think you can write a book?" And I'm going, that's 40 years ago. We're in our 50s. Like, seriously? You still think that? And she's like, yeah. Now she's a school teacher, so it's a bit of a worry. But anyway, so I sort of went, she goes, I should be the one writing a book. And I was going, but just because I'm writing a book doesn't mean you can't write a book. It was this really weird conversation. It was like we're back in our teens having this argument over nothing. Anyway, so she chose not to write the book with me. So I wrote the book, which is my third book. But the first book I wrote is called The Journey to Becoming Your Own Best Friend, which is and obviously a story that I feel we all need to do. You know, we come into this world with love and stuff, and then through the process of growing up, we end up with all of these disconnections from ourselves. And then we, you know, have to come back to ourselves. The second one was Beyond a Mother's Worst Nightmare, which is my story about Dan. And I wrote that in 2014. So that was like a 3.5 year journey at that time. Then I wrote Teenagers Playing Grown-Ups, and then I wrote Live Love by Design. And Live Love by Design is really my first book upgraded, you know, 6 years later or 4 years later. And now I'm in the process of writing Demystifying Loss, which is, I'm really, really loving it. I keep editing it and I keep adding to it, but it's like, no, I want it out before Christmas. So that's where I'm at with that. For someone who is hopeless at English, anyone can write. That's all I have to say. It's just, you know, we hold ourselves back, even with speaking. You know, I used to look at my CEOs and I used to go, wow, look at them out the front, you know, commanding the audience, doing this, doing that. There's no way I could ever do that. And now it's like, grab the hook, get her off the stage. We hold ourselves back so much. It's incredible. And that's why I credit Dan. That's why Dan's the co-founder of the Chaston Centre, because he just guides me and he just, you know, come on, Mum, you can do this, you can do this. He plants these really weird ideas in my head and I just run with it. Why not?
So where are your books? Where can our listeners get your books?
They can come to the Chaston Centre and they can get them from there. They're on Amazon and all that sort of stuff. I haven't really promoted them as much as what I'm going to be promoting this one. I thought I was going to publish this one, like go to a publisher to publish it. I went down that process and at the end of the day, they're like, you'll be promoting it as much as what we will to get it out there. So I thought, why am I giving away my rights? So I am going to self-publish it.
Yeah, we were talking about that there's, I mean, the publishers are great. They can get it maybe into certain places, but you still have to market it. You still have to be the one. And a lot of authors don't understand that. I think once they're with a publisher, they're going to do it all for them. They're not going to, and they'll pull it off their shelves if it doesn't sell. So it's just like,
yeah. So why give away the rights to your book?
Right. And the profits.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all in your pocket.
No. But going through that process, I did get to speak to a couple of publishers, which was really good. So I got a lot of really good ideas from them, as in the way, you know, the cover of the book and the set out of the book, the difference between a self-published book and a published book, how it's really obvious. So yeah, the cover I pretty feel, you know, is really, really special. Not that I have it there, but I've got it on my paper. So, yeah.
How can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, well, they can just go to thechastoncentre.com. Chaston spelled Chaston, and centre is CENTRE, the English way, not the American way of spelling centre. And yeah, and it is.com, or you can email me at karen@karenchaston.com.au, which is pretty easy. So yeah, so thank you.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Very much.
Yeah, it is interesting. The more you deep dive into loss, what I found is, why aren't we taught this at school? Like, sure, we may not value it, but just to have the basic understandings, you know, that I share, and believe me, in my book, I go through it all. And it's a really easy concept to understand to help people to not go into avoidance. And let's face it, the world is so good at avoidance tactics, you know, food, alcohol, drugs, working too much, you know, Netflix, social media, it's all avoidance. Even shopping, it's called retail therapy. You know, it's just so many things that we can do to say, no, I'm not going into avoidance. I'm actually going to deep dive into this emotion. Sure, it may be painful, but once I deep dive into it, I'll grab the lesson, I'll get to understand what it's all about, and then I won't need to do that lesson again. Because the more we avoid it, the more you're going to get something else come back and something else come back. I know that if I had stayed in my corporate life, I probably would have got sick, or I would have got something else. The universe was going, Karen, you need to leave. You need to start doing what you're meant to be doing. And, you know, I had fun in my corporate life. I stayed in some of my jobs way too long because they were so much fun. But I don't even drink now. I stopped drinking at the end of 2018 and I don't even drink, which is amazing. I used to drink a bottle of wine a day. My friends and family are like, I cannot believe you don't even crave a drink. I'm like, no. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing everything here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
It was really interesting, your story.
It's a pleasure.
We do appreciate you sharing it with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Bye.